Sunday, a good day to correct some false teaching and lies that you've been told while sitting in church or even watching movies, reading books. Moses, chosen by God, given the 10 Commandments. Most of the laws are based on that today. Even your Constitution in America some of it is based on the 10 Commandments. Moses, born in Africa, raised by Africans. Moses was a Hebrew, an Israelite, and a black man. All Hebrews were black. He married a woman from Ethiopia, and his sister Miriam didn't like this. She didn't like it because Ethiopians had a different culture to them. So she was talking bad about Moses marrying out of his race. So God was listening to this, and God said, Miriam, Aaron, who the one she was gossiping to, and Moses, please come to the temple steps. I have some things I want to speak to you about. So they were on the temple steps, and he said, Miriam, you have been talking about your brother Moses, slandering that he's marrying outside of his culture. That is a sin. He said, so for your punishment, I'm going to strike you with leprosy and whiteness. So she was struck to become a white leper. Now, you can read all this for yourself. The whole story is in Numbers 12, starting at verse 1. So then Moses saw this, and he said, please, God, she's my sister. She probably didn't mean to talk about me like this. Please, I beg you, restore her back. I don't want my sister to be a leper. So God, he loved Moses. So he said, Moses, if she was talking bad and your father found out and spat in her face, for 7 days she would be ashamed and have to stand outside the house. So for 7 days then, she will become a white leper. Then after 7 days, I will restore her. But do not forget this lesson. So this you can read for yourself. So next to racism, which is a very dark thing in people's hearts, is jealousy and envy. And be very careful, because what the Bible says about envy is, and you can read it, Proverbs 14:30, it rots your bones.
My testimony in how I, a Gentile white male who grew up in a conservative evangelical community, how I became awoken to who the true chosen people of God are, the true Hebrew Israelites really are. And to share the entire story, I will say that question. And he said, my son, they are my true chosen children. They are the true chosen people of me. And to back up that voice, he led me to Deuteronomy chapter 28, where in the first time in my life, those words bounced off and penetrated my heart, and I wept and I wept. When I finally, after all these years, got an understanding to why our so-called black brothers and sisters in this country and around the world are so mistreated, and especially in this country are so oppressed. It's because they are the true chosen people of the Most High God. They are the true Hebrew Israelites that are in another Egypt of America under a 400-year curse due to the disobedience of their forefathers, and that the Jews that we have thought have been fooled by are not.
It's a term that conjures up images of luxury cars, private jets, and sprawling mansions. But wealth is not just a snapshot of current assets and liabilities. It's a tapestry woven through time. And unfortunately for many racial groups, this tapestry has been riddled with holes and tears due to systemic racism. I am talking about the temporal dimension of wealth, a dimension that is often overlooked and underestimated. A dimension that is crucial to understanding the wealth gap between racial groups in our society. Let's break it down, shall we? Just as compound interest can grow an investment over time, systemic racism compounds the disadvantages faced by marginalized groups. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill, picking up more and more snow as it goes. Each generation that encounters barriers to wealth accumulation adds another layer to the wealth gap. The interest accumulates in the form of lost educational opportunities, diminished property values, and stunted business growth. And as the saying goes, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But in this case, it's not just about individual wealth, it's about the wealth of entire communities and generations. Let's take a trip down memory lane, back to a time when Jim Crow laws and redlining were the norm. These discriminatory practices systematically restricted access to wealth-building opportunities for people of color. And while they say these laws may no longer exist, their effects are still felt today. The wealth gap is not just about individual effort, it's about how systemic racism shapes the playing field. The myth of meritocracy has been shoved down our throats for too long. The idea that hard work and talent alone determines economic success is a pervasive lie that ignores the structural barriers that are in place. The American dream, often touted as a beacon of hope and opportunity, is not just a lie for the average American, it is especially a lie for people of color. The playing field is not level, and it never has been. But hey, don't just take my word for it, let's look at some numbers. According to a report from the Institute for Policy Studies, the median wealth of white families in the United States is nearly 10 times that of black families and 8 times that of Latinx families. And this gap widens even further when we look at the wealth of the top 1%. In today's society, it's no secret that the distribution of wealth is far from equal. In fact, it's more lopsided than a drunk giraffe on stilts. And while many factors contribute to this imbalance, one of the most significant players is government policy. From tax codes to inheritance laws and social welfare programs, government policies have the power to either exacerbate or alleviate the wealth gap. And let's be real, when it comes to racial wealth distribution, the scales are tilted so far in one direction that they might as well be in a parallel universe. But why does this matter? Well, the answer is simple: systemic racism. You see, policies that fail to consider the racial wealth gap reinforce this insidious form of discrimination. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of seeing my fellow human beings held down by a system that was never designed to lift them up. Let's take a closer look at some of the ways government policies impact wealth distribution and the ripple effects it has on our society. First up, tax codes. Now, I'm no math whiz, but it doesn't take a genius to see that the wealthy are getting away with paying less in taxes than a college student living off of ramen noodles. And who is most affected by these loopholes? You guessed it, marginalized communities. This not only widens the wealth gap, but also reinforces the false narrative that the rich are somehow more deserving of their wealth than the rest of us peasants. Next, we have inheritance laws. While the idea of leaving behind a legacy for your loved ones is heartwarming, the reality is that it perpetuates the cycle of wealth concentration within certain groups. And most of us don't have a trust fund waiting for us when our great aunt twice removed kicks the bucket. In fact, for many families of color, inheritance laws only serve to widen the racial wealth gap, leaving them with even fewer resources to build generational wealth. And let's not forget about social welfare programs. While these programs are intended to provide a safety net for those in need, they often fall short when it comes to addressing the racial wealth gap. These programs are not designed to consider the historical and systemic barriers that have hindered the accumulation of wealth for marginalized communities. As a result, they do little to close the gap and can even perpetuate the harmful stereotypes that people of color are lazy and dependent on government handouts. The impact of wealth disparity goes beyond just economics. It's a psychological issue as well. The constant stress and anxiety associated with financial instability can have long-term effects on mental health. It's like a never-ending game of Monopoly, except there are no get-out-of-jail-free cards for those at the bottom. And let's not forget the social dynamics that are influenced by the perception of economic disparity. It can lead to tension and resentment between racial groups, further perpetuating the cycle of division and discrimination. But perhaps the most alarming ripple effect of wealth inequality is its impact on community resources, educational opportunities, and even political power. The concentration of wealth in certain groups leads to a cycle of privilege that perpetuates systemic racism and inequality.
The claim that black people, specifically African Americans, are the real Hebrew Israelites is a belief held by some groups, but it is not widely accepted or supported by mainstream historical or biblical scholarship. Here is an overview of the perspectives and the contents around these beliefs. The Israelites are a Semitic people from the ancient Near East, particularly in the region that encompasses modern-day Israel and part of surrounding areas. Historical and archaeological evidence places the origins of the Israels in the region around the late 2nd millennium BCE. Mainstream Judaism traces the Jewish people's ancestry to the ancient Israelites and maintains a continuous cultural, religious, and historical identity linked to the ancient Near Eastern region. The Black Hebrew Israelite movement emerged in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century. Proponents believe that African Americans are descendants of the ancient Israelites, citing various interpretations of biblical texts and historical narratives. For many adherents, the identification as Hebrew Israelites is tied to reclaiming a spiritual, cultural, and historical identity in the face of the legacy of slavery and systemic racism. The movement varies widely, with some groups strictly adhering to religious practices reminiscent of traditional Judaism, while others incorporate elements of Christianity, Islam, or other spiritual beliefs. Most historians and scholars do not support the claim that African Americans are direct descendants of the ancient Israelites. They point to a lack of historical and genetic evidence connecting the two groups. The origins of African Americans are predominantly linked to various ethnic groups from West and Central Africa. Some Black Hebrew Israelite groups have been criticized for promoting exclusionary or supremacist views. These views have sometimes led to tensions with other Jewish communities and have been labeled as extremist by some monitoring organizations. Thank you for watching.